Hello and welcome back to 5-Man Dungeons. Now, what's this strange icon on the map, I hear you ask? Yes, we're in Mythic mode today. So with the release of the Mythic Dungeons, I decided to continue this series on that difficulty instead of the Heroic modes, as I feel Heroic mode has become somewhat redundant now. It's mostly just used for gearing up very new characters, and honestly you kind of steamroll through it anyway, so perhaps the Mythic mode will add a little bit more challenge. We can have a look at some of the mechanics there, go into a bit more depth as they actually matter in this difficulty. The more observant among you may know that I'm not on my DK anymore, so for the remainder of these I'll be switching up tanks, trying to get some different points of view. I will be playing every tank class through the dungeons. Some are more geared than others. My monk happens to be one of my more geared ones, which you'll see here. Every member of my group kind of overgears these dungeons quite a lot, so take what you see with a grain of salt. It's not going to be necessarily representative of the actual experience, given the fact that we're also a pre-made group, so we're pretty organised. We were on Mumble throughout all of this, kind of discussing what to do and what's happening and so on. I guess with pugs, you might have a little bit more difficulty, and things may be a little bit more messy, so I definitely advise getting a pre-made group to try and do these, because there are a few spots in particular dungeons where you can run into a lot of problems if you're not executing properly. And given that people aren't always familiar with the tactics for 5-mans because they're so easily ignorable, then you might find yourself facing down stuff that you don't really know. So that out the way then, we'll have a look at the Everbloom today, a full run through, and we'll go over all of the trash and mob abilities. So let's begin. Now, the very first pack you run into the Everbloom here is a pack of 3 introductory mobs. You'll have 1 Dread Petal, which is a non-elite, and you'll have 1 Everbloom Naturalist and an Everbloom Tender, which are the 2 humanoid elites. Now the Dread Petal, like all the other Dread Petals in this dungeon, just stack a poison dot on the tank. It does quite a fair amount of damage, although the Dread Petal itself doesn't really do much with its melee. The main risk there is from the poison dot. Now the Everbloom Naturalist only really has one real ability, which is the Barrage of Leaves. It's a channeled spell that he'll target towards a random party member and he'll deal damage over time to them. It deals a moderate amount of damage, but if you happen to have more than one of these being channeled on you at the same time, you can find yourself quickly dying. So it's interruptible, stunnable, disorients, all sorts of stuff you can do to the Naturalist to disrupt their casting. The other mob here is the Everbloom Tender, which has 2 abilities, unlike the Naturalist counterpart. It has Dancing Thorns, which is just a straight nature damage nuke. You don't have to do much about this. You can interrupt it if you have a spare interrupt cooldown, otherwise it's mostly ignorable. The more dangerous one is the Enraged Growth. He'll target one of the other mobs in the pack and he'll increase the damage and attack speed of them. Now it's popular for these Naturalists to increase the attack speed of another mob, which is the Melded Berserkers. Now the Melded Berserkers will do an Enrage on themselves, also increasing their attack speed. So if they have the Enrage plus the Enraged Growth from the Tender, you can find they'll deal a lot of tank damage. They're one of the higher tank damage mobs in this dungeon. So make sure the Enraged Growth is kicked, or stunned, or disoriented. Again, 5-man dungeons, most of these stuff will work on all the trash mobs to disrupt casting. The other abilities that the Melded Berserkers have would be the Veil Breath, which is a nature damage cone in front of the caster. It doesn't really do very much. You can face away from other party members, but if they get hit by it, it's not really going to cause you many problems. The more damaging one is the Bounding Whirl. He'll leap towards one of your party members, and he'll begin spinning, sort of like Warrior Bladestorm. He'll damage everyone around him. During this time, however, he won't move, so just get away from him. When he's done spinning, he'll run back to the tank. Easy enough to handle, not really a problem. You'll see to the side as well, there's also a large group of Dread Petals. You can sort of be wary of pulling them. If you have a Moonkin for Starfall or a Hunter with Barrage, it's pretty likely they might get pulled into the pack as well. But they're dealt with just like the single Dread Petal, except the poison will stack quite a lot higher. Just spell it. If you're a dwarf, you can use Stone Form. Use some defensives here. I mainly just put my leg sweep to try and stun stuff, and use some guards. It's not the highest damage pack, it doesn't call for too much. So I'm just paralysing this Berserker here so it doesn't patrol into us. And we're jumping up the wall here. Now a lot of the people in my group here do quite a lot of challenge mode runs, so we're very used to these jumps. that one in particular can be quite annoying. You just have to experiment a bit, see what you can do to get up there the best way for you. I believe mammoths are a good way to do it, but warriors can leap up, hunters can disengage. There's a few different ways. We move into the first boss room here, and you'll see this pack of 3 has 2 of the naturals we discussed before. They'll dealt with in much of the same way, just stop the barrage of leaves if you can. You can see our warrior party member here gets both channels on him and his health dips pretty low. The other enemy in this pack is a new one, which is the Everbloom Mender. Now these mobs should be top priority in each pack because they have 2 very dangerous abilities. The first one is a Choking Vines, which is a 10-second stun on a random party member, which also deals damage over time. It's dispellable, but it can go on a lot of people at once if you have more than one Mender. Everyone gets stunned, nobody can stop casting, nobody can dispel, everyone gets barrage of leaves, and you're having a really bad time. The other ability is Healing Waters, and as you may expect, simply heals an ally. So the Menders will try and heal themselves along with the Naturalists, and if you pull a lot of stuff at once, you'll find the Menders just heal everything up and you get absolutely nowhere. Now we do pull 2 packs here, so as a Brewmaster Monk I'm using my Leg Sweep to stop casting, but I'm also using Breath of Fire with the glyph. Now the Breath of Fire glyph allows you to disorient anyone you hit with Breath of Fire, which is great for stopping spell casts and interrupting the channel. So you're a Brewmaster here, you can use Breath of Fire, it's great. If you have any other AoE stuns as well, they're good. Leg Sweep, Remorseless Winter, Pass It or Totem. Really, if these mobs have their casts interrupted a lot, they're not too dangerous. So our warrior using Dragon Roar as well does great effect. So here we arrive at the very first boss then. Now, he's pretty easy honestly, he doesn't really do very much. His basic melee attack is relatively high damage, although most of the bosses in Mythic dungeons are. He'll also do this Parched Gasp, which is a very high damage nuke to the tank. You can see that with each of these I'm trying to time my guard to absorb the bulk of it. If you don't time that, you can find yourself being comboed down by breath plus melee attacks. Besides that, honestly, he doesn't do anything at all. You're going to have globules of water coming from the lake around you and landing on the ground. There'll be a blue swirl to indicate the location there. They don't usually tend to go on tank, so it's mostly about the DPS to worry about. They just move out of the way. Really, if you do get hit, it doesn't deal a lot of damage anyway, but do your healer a favour, get out of the way there. The other mechanic is these roots, which is the unchecked growth, which will be targeted upon a random party member. They'll get a red arrow on their head, and after a few seconds, the roots will come from the boss and form a patch on the ground where they were standing. Now when Witherbark reaches 0 mana, he's going to be petrified, and he will just stop everything he's doing, and he'll start calling these aqueous globules from the lake around him. Now they'll move from all sorts of directions, but ultimately they'll just go straight directly towards him. And if any of these reach him, they give him 25 mana back. When he absorbs 4 of them, he becomes active again and starts doing his abilities. Now you can stop these globules either by killing them, or by allowing them to pass over the unchecked growth. If one of the globules passes over a growth, then the globule will despawn, and an ad will spawn that does a basic melee attack. The ads hit for a relatively high amount of damage, so more than 4 or 5 of them is going to cause your tank a lot of pain. Now, this boss is kind of counterintuitive. You might think DPS had to switch to the globules and you had to avoid getting ads spawned, but really with the low HP pool of the boss you can sort of do the opposite. Just try and place the unchecked growth around the boss, so the globules don't get to him, instead they pass over here and despawn. And if you pop your Heroism or your Bloodlust here, you can mostly just nuke the boss down and kill him before there's any real danger. So after this boss is down, you can just mount up and head back in the direction you came. Now there's a little bit more wall jumping to do here. Blizzard hotfixed a lot of the easy ones, so some of the leftover ones are a little more complicated, although this one is easier than the first one. You just get on a mammoth mount and you can jump up in between this root you see on screen here. You have to kind of jump at the right angle in order to hit it, otherwise you're going to fall off. But if one person gets up, then you can get in a multi-passenger mount and stand near the edge and other people can hop in. Now we just traverse over some of the routes here, jump through stuff, make sure not to fall off the edge. Bit of a disaster if you do, you can fall right into trash mobs and we all know how that's going to go. So using this shortcut, we find ourselves at the next boss already. We skipped a large portion of the trash here, which I greatly advise doing because it shortens the length of the dungeon an awful lot. Now this next boss is a trio of 3. They're quite a lot more complicated than the first boss and arguably one of the more difficult bosses in this dungeon. The main target you want to be concerned with on the pool is Life Warden Gola. Now Life Warden Gola has 3 abilities. His main ability is a water bolt which he'll spam on random party members. It just deals a moderate amount of damage. Not too deadly, you can mostly just let it go. The 2 dangerous abilities that Gola has are Revitalizing Waters and Rapid Tides. Now, Revitalizing Waters heals any of the bosses in this encounter for a large portion of their health. Understandably, you don't want bosses being healed when the objective is to get their health to go down and not up. So you can assign one of your party members to interrupt Revitalizing Waters at all times. The second ability Gola has is Rapid Tides. Now, he'll empower one of his allies and he'll remove the cooldowns from all of their abilities. So if he casts this on himself, he's just going to spam Revitalizing Waters over and over and over, and there's no way you can interrupt all of them. Assign a second interrupt to Rapid Tides. However, if it does happen to go out, it can be purged before too much damage is done. So that's just a good way to mitigate the harm there. And the second boss in this encounter is the Earthshaper. He also has 3 abilities. Like Gola, he'll spam a filler spell, which in his case is Nature's Wrath, which also just deals nature damage to a random player. Again, you can mostly just let this go, it's not really a big deal. The 2 dangerous abilities he has, however, are Bramble Patch and Briar Skin. Now, Bramble Patch will target a random party member, and it will conjure a patch of brambles under that player. These brambles last for 45 seconds, probably for the rest of the encounter, and standing in them will slow you down and deal heavy nature damage. Don't stand in the fire, or in this case the brambles. Pretty straightforward. The other ability, Briar Skin, he's going to protect one of his allies with briars for 8 seconds. It reduces all the damage they take by 75%, and anyone who attacks into the ally while they have Briar Skin active is going to be taking reflective damage. So classes with a high attack speed, like rogues, enhancement shamans, anything dealing lots of fast damage, is going to take mega reflect damage and kill themselves very, very quickly. So if this Briar Skin goes up on the target you're nuking, get it purged immediately. It's very dangerous. And if you don't have purge in your group, then you need to assign an interrupter to Earthshaper to stop Briar Skin every time. The final boss here is just the big HP Brute. Now, he also has a few abilities to worry about, although they're considerably less dangerous than his 2 friends. The first one he does is a Noxious Eruption. He'll just explode and he'll deal nature damage to everyone within 10 yards. Very straightforward. There's a big green visual there. Get out of the way. If you get hit by it, you get knocked back, you take damage, and you look pretty dumb in process as well. He'll also do a Rending Charge. He'll charge to a random player and he'll just hit them, deal nature damage. He'll leave a dot on you which takes their physical damage over time. Not a whole lot you can do there. He'll also do a Grasping Vine, where he goes DK modes, he pulls someone in, and when he does that, he'll cast a Slash, where he'll slash everyone in front of him, and he'll do heavy damage. So if you get grasped in, watch which direction he faces and get out of the slash, and any players who are in melee range also need to get out of the slash. Now, as was mentioned at the start, you first want to kill Life Warden to stop his heals, to stop his Rapid Tides. He goes down pretty fast, doesn't have too much HP. Let's pop your cooldowns and nuke him down. The Earthshaper should be the next target to stop the Briar Skins, and you should leave the large HP up until the end, although he's likely to receive some cleave damage in the meantime. Really, there's not a whole lot to be concerned with here as a tank, since most of the damage is random party members. All you can do is help with interrupts, and you can actually stun the Life Warden and Earthshaper as well. They're susceptible to most things like trash mobs are, as in they can be stunned, they can be knocked back and pulled around. If you have a DK in your group, it's really good to Death Grip the Earthshaper into the pack so everything can be AoE'd together. We unfortunately did not have a DK in the group this time, so the Earthshaper was stuck outside the pack. It's not going to make the fight any harder, it'll just make it take a little bit longer. But once you kill Life Warden, the fight is mostly over by that point. You can quickly clean up Earthshaper and then clean up the remaining one as well. So after this we leave the boss area via the path to the north. Now at this point you can take either the left fork or the right fork. The right fork holds an optional boss, which we opted to take, so I'll cover that here. Before you get there you have to deal with the infested Venom Fang. Now this is just a single mob on its own, it's not too dangerous, it can be stunned just like any other trash mob in here. It'll do a Spore Breath in front of it, which is relatively high damage to anyone standing in front, although the actual reach of the breath seems to be quite short. So if you're in front but a little bit outside of melee range, you usually don't get hit. It also seems to have some sort of vine grip ability to pull the tank in. It was pretty hard to find information on this ability, however, so all I can really say is if you try and run away, sometimes you get pulled back, sometimes you don't. I'm not too sure, it's pretty unpredictable. Regardless, you move down here and you can burst one of the eggs to start the next boss encounter. Now before you get to the boss itself, you have to deal with a gauntlet of trash mobs. You'll be faced with 3 spiders at a time: the Gorge Burster, the Venom Sprayer, and the Toxic Spiderling. Now Toxic Spiderling is just the basic mob here. It doesn't really do anything, pretty much. It melee attacks the tank and it gains increased damage over time via the Toxic Blood ability. Besides that, you just hit it and it dies, so not much to say there. The Venom Sprayer is much like the Toxic Spiderling, except instead of the melee attack, it's going to spam Venom Spray at the tank. This does a little bit more damage than the Toxic Spiderling would, but it's interruptible, stunnable. Just group these up and AoE them. The only really important spider here would be the Gorge Burster. Now he'll fixate on a random party member and he'll run after them. Well, I say run, he moves very slowly. If he manages to reach the party member through some miracle, then he'll explode and he'll do massive damage to your whole group. This is one of the things in this dungeon that can kill your whole party instantly, so yeah, watch out for the red arrow, watch out for the fixate. Don't fall asleep and let the burster explode on you. The other mob that comes in here by himself is the Venom Crazed Pale One. Now you might notice the patches of gas left around the room. These are left behind when any of the spiders die. The Venom Crazed Pale One will try and get to these gas puddles and inhale them. And if they manage to inhale them, they'll turn into a Hulk and gain increased damage and health. Besides that, they have some very basic abilities such as a swipe to deal damage in front of the caster, and just the standard melee attacks on the tank. So just don't get in front, kill them before they manage to get to the gas. If they do start inhaling, you can knock them back, you can death grip them, you can stun them, you can hard CC them. There are many ways to stop the gas inhale, so it should never be allowed to happen. Whilst this is happening, the boss will often drop down from the web, and she'll signal that by a green area on the ground. She'll do just an AoE in that area, and she'll damage players, but also enemies who are in the area as well. So if you're a tank, you can try and position mobs inside this area and pop a small defensive. So I was often using guard and standing in these with mobs, so the mobs take the slash as well and lose a lot of their HP. It's not really a mandatory mechanic, but it can help a little bit. It's something easy to do if the boss happens to drop down nearby. Now after you've dealt with a few waves of spiders, the boss herself will drop down from the web. She has a toxic bolt like the spiders. She'll sometimes cast that on the tank for a bunch of nature damage. It's interruptible, and she also tries to cast Venomous Sting as well, which is also interruptible. And that just hits a random person and leaves a dot on them for 15 seconds. Besides that, she'll also fill the room with more of these gas patches. And the Venom Crazed Pale Ones will continue to flood in during this phase. So the more gas there is, the higher chance of the Pale One running to the gas pool and inhaling the gas. So remain vigilant during this phase and try and stop them from doing that. The more important mechanic here is the consume mechanic. If there's a Venom Crazed Pale One alive, she'll jump on top of it and try to devour it. It's a long cast time ability, and she won't do anything else during this time. But if she manages to consume the orc, then she'll be healed for a large amount of HP. Now you can kill the orc to stop this, which is the expected method of handling this. But a little known fact is you can also use transformation abilities on the orc and it interrupts it. So if you have a shaman for hex or you have a mage for polymorph, just use that on the orc during consume and suddenly the cast stops. Now this trivializes the mechanic an whole lot, but it does mean the tank has to continue to tank the orcs. So the damage can pile up near the end if you have 2 or even 3 of them up. So be ready with some of your major cooldowns, like Fortifying Brew in the case of the monk. You can also continue to stun the orcs, or you can even hard CC them as they come in with Paralyze to reduce damage, as you can see I did to one of them here. Besides that, the boss just uses her 2 main abilities, plus Consume, drops more gas. Doesn't really do anything. She has quite low HP after the gauntlet, so she shouldn't last very long. So going back the way we came now, we can take the other fork in the path, which leads to the non-optional boss, which is Archmage Sol. Now, in this area of the dungeon, all of the Kirantar mages have been taken over by the parasites. You'll find 3 different variations. There's the Infested Ice Caller, the Addled Arcanomancer, and the Putrid Pyromancer. So Blizzard trying to go with a little bit of rhyming there. Each of these has a host of abilities of their own. The Ice Caller will cast a Frostbolt on random party members. Deals damage, slows you down, what you'd expect from a Frostbolt. He'll also do Frozen Snap, which is a blue area on the ground, and anyone who's standing in this after 2 seconds gets frozen. So just move well away from these. To stop you from moving away from those, we have the Arcanomancer. They'll do their basic filler spell like the Ice Caller as well. They'll just spam Arcane Blast, hit people randomly, deal some damage. But they'll also cast a Black Hole, which is an area on the ground which draws people into it. Now it doesn't actually do any damage. You can safely stand in the middle of the black hole and you won't take damage, but you'll also be stuck in place there. And if you happen to get the ice on you, there's a good chance you'll get frozen. So this ability is more disruptive than direct damage. Now the final of these mages is perhaps the most deadly one, and that's the Pyromancer. Now his main filler spell is Fireball, but in addition to doing direct damage, it also leaves a dot, which stacks. So you can end up with your whole group with lots of applications of this dot, taking a lot of damage, getting hit by other random spells. You can see we actually overpulled a bit here, and despite being mostly mythic geared, we did end up with player deaths here. So that's just an indication of how deadly these can be and not to take them lightly. The Pyromancer also does a Dragon's Breath, which is a forward cone of fire damage. It does a lot of damage to anyone who's hit by it, and it also disorients them for 4 seconds. So interrupt that, or just get out the way, because he'll just root himself doing that. When each of these dies, a Spore Image will spawn, which is just a basic copy of the enemy you just killed, that only spams the filler spell and doesn't do the special abilities. So the aim should be to kill the primary mages first, and then leave the Spore Images until afterwards. Now the next boss we get to here is Archmage Sol herself. Now this boss is quite interesting in the way she works. She has 3 phases, but the players have control over which phase they want to be the boss in at any given time. Now on the pool she will always be in the fire phase, and during this phase she'll cast Fireball on the tank. Now it doesn't do a large amount of damage initially, but her damage does ramp up over the course of the fight, which we'll cover quite soon. The other ability in this phase is Everbloom. Now these are fire flowers on the ground, indicated by the beacon of orange light that you can see. And she'll sometimes ignite these and cause rings of flame to radiate outwards. Now she'll cast more and more of these flowers, so you'll get more and more rings of flame. You have to try and jump over them to avoid damage, but understandably, as you get a lot of them, it becomes very difficult to do so. The other thing she'll cast during this phase is the Parasitic Growth. Now, this is the ability that controls which phase she's in at any given time. If you interrupt Parasitic Growth, she will change to the next phase in the sequence. The sequence always goes Fire Phase, Frost Phase, Arcane Phase. If you do not interrupt the Parasitic Growth, she'll remain in the phase she's currently in, and she'll gain a damage and haste buff. Now the idea of the fight is to try and keep her in the first phase as long as possible, because changing the phase causes her to spawn a Spore Image which assists her in combat, and gives her access to new abilities, as well as maintaining some of her Fire School abilities. Understandably, you can't keep her in the fire phase for the entire fight because the tank damage gets way out of control. You get too many fire rings, it becomes very, very painful. So we end up interrupting here and getting her down to the ice phase. In this phase, she replaces her Fireball with a Frostbolt. It's basically the same thing, don't really change how you play around that. The next ability she does is Frozen Rain, which is a blizzard area on the ground that damages anyone who's inside it. In addition to this, she also continues to ignite the fire blooms although she will not drop any new fire blooms. So a good tactic here is just to run away from all of the fire blooms, get well out of range so you don't have to jump the rings. She won't drop any new ones, and all you have to worry about is getting out of frozen rain. You also had the spore image that you got from interrupting her fire skill phase here. You can spend stuns on it to stop it casting, and you can spend interrupts to stop it casting as well. Ultimately, it just adds a little bit of damage, but it can be quite easily controlled. Now, if you do happen to interrupt the parasitic growth during the frost phase, you'll go into the arcane phase. Normally, you should never aim to go into the arcane phase because it's going to wipe your group after a pretty short period of time. She's going to spam Arcane Burst over and over, which is heavy damage to your whole party. If you do go into Arcane phase, the boss needs to die very, very quickly afterwards. You really should aim to kill her during the Ice phase. Spending too long in Arcane phase is just a guaranteed death sentence for your group. Additionally, stopping the Ice phase gets you a second Spore image, so you have 2 Spore images, and the boss, and the Arcane Bursts, and the fire rings, and the frozen rain, all to deal with. Yeah, that's not going to do so well. She doesn't have a lot of HP though, so you can pretty much get her down during this ice phase and don't have to worry about dealing with the chaos that is the arcane phase. As an aside, I also have to mention that the voice actor for this boss is fantastic. She's done a very good job and greatly captures the essence of the boss who's being mind controlled by these parasites, losing control of her own abilities, and it seems like there's no way out. So after getting past the leftover mages here, we go through the portal and find ourselves in Stormwind for the final boss of the encounter. Now, you might look at this boss and you might see the 21 million HP and think, what's going on here? Now, during this boss, you have assistance from the Kirintar battle mages. You might think, they're just NPCs, they're not important, we can ignore them. But you really do need these NPCs, they contribute a large amount to the battle. So Yalnu is a boss that likes to summon adds, essentially. He has some abilities of his own, such as the Colossal Blow, where he does a frontal attack and he'll stun and damage anyone in the frontal attack. And besides that, most of his abilities are going to be summoning adds. One type of add he summons is the Swift Sproutlings. Now he'll summon a large swarm of these at once, and they will stab at the tank and apply a dot, which also slows movement speeds. Despite their small appearance, these are one of the more dangerous parts of the encounter for the tank, and I would highly recommend using large cooldowns to survive when the dot starts stacking up. If you are a monk, as I am here, you can use your Ox statue to pick these up. The Ox statue is immune to bleeds and can tank these with ease. The second type of add that Yalnu will spawn is the Gnarled Ancient. Now he'll only spawn one of these at a time, and it's a large mob that will do a lumbering swipe in front of it, which is just a moderate amount of physical damage to anyone in front. Even if you do stand on this, it's not really a big deal. The Lumbering Engine is perhaps one of the easier mobs to deal with here. The last one is the Vicious Mandragora. Now he summons 2 of these at a time, and they will do a Noxious Breath in front of them, which deals high nature damage to anyone in front. If you're being hit by Yalnu and these 2 Noxious Breaths, you're going to take a lot of damage and potentially even die as a tank. Now Yalnu's other ability is Genesis. This is one of the main mechanics of the encounter. He'll begin to channel and he'll spawn flowers all around the area. And what you have to do is have players run over and trample these flowers before the Genesis cast ends. At the end of the cast, any flowers that were not trampled will sprout into lashers, and these lashers will spit acid at random party members. So if you let all of these lashers hatch, you're going to end up with every person in the group dead in probably around 5 seconds. So yeah, it's under your best interest to stomp these. You can use things like Stampeding Roar from Druids, and you can try and ask for Aspect of the Fox and be disappointed by the fact that it doesn't exist anymore. Regardless, stop your casting, go and stomp them, it needs to be done. The other ability Yalnu does is Entanglement. He'll either entangle one of your party members or one of the Kirintar mages. Regardless of who it is, you need to free them. Party members obviously contribute a lot, and the Kirintar mages have abilities that will contribute greatly to your success in this fight. The Kirintar mages themselves will spam basic filler spells like fireballs, frostbolts and so on, but they also have mass damage spells which help you a lot in killing the adds. One of these is the Patches of Fire on the ground, which deals heavy damage to anything inside it. So you can drag adds inside here, you can also drag Yalnu inside here to contribute to chipping away at his massive health pool. There will be arcane orbs that float around as well, again dealing massive damage to anything they pass through. They're a good way of killing the small adds that swarm you, and just adding some extra damage to Yalnu as well. So yeah, you can see that these are pretty important mechanics dealing with the adds, because you can easily get overwhelmed if you're not properly utilising the Kirin buffs. You just want to keep these mages alive, free them from entanglement. They can be healed if necessary, though I found if you deal with the mechanics properly they never need healing. So this is a pretty long fight judging by the high HP pool Yalnu has, but it's really a fight of attrition. Nothing changes as the fight goes on, just continues to deal with all the mechanics in the same ways as before. So to sum up, Everbloom is a pretty nice instance. There's a lot of weird wall jumping you can do, people get pretty frustrated by that. I'd actually say in a lot of pugs, you should probably skip the wall jumping and just take the regular routes, because there's always going to be someone who can't do the jumps, and they end up getting frustrated, you end up getting frustrated, and it just ruins the mood of the overall run. So just spend the extra 2 or 3 minutes to clear the trash instead. Thematically and aesthetically, Everbloom is perhaps one of my favourite dungeons this expansion. Once you get up to Archmage Sol and Yalnu, the voice acting here is good, the scene is good, you really get the idea that you're helping to save Azeroth from this infestation, sort of like the Scourge but plants. So props to Blizzard for creating a nice dungeon here.